Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into the work of an actor who really makes you reconsider what performance can be, Wagner Moura. You've likely seen him, maybe as Pablo Escobar, these huge transformative roles crossing borders. But when you look closely, it seems like his craft is, well, it's more than just acting. It feels almost like philosophy, using the screen to explore ethics.
That's really the heart of it, isn't it? We're not just talking about, technical skill here. We're looking at work that people describe as philosophy in action.
Right.
Moura's approach, it seems quite intentional. It's meant to shift something in you, the audience, to make you face these sometimes pretty uncomfortable truths about human nature and society.
Through the characters.
Exactly, through their specific experiences.
Yeah.
He seems to see his art as a way to gain wisdom tied really closely to ethics.
Okay, so let's set that as our mission for this deep dive. How does Moura take all this intellectual homework he does and turn performing into this kind of philosophical journey? It sounds very high level, but the sources suggest it's not about abstract ideas.
No, absolutely not abstract. The term that keeps coming up is experiential wisdom.
Experiential wisdom. Yep.
Yeah. He embodies this idea of the philosopher through hardcore knowledge gathering, real research, lived experience where possible, just exhaustive digging. That's what fuels the art. He's chasing truth through dedication to the craft.
So let's trace that dedication back, because it didn't start on a film set, did it? It started somewhere else entirely.
Right. And this is fascinating, I think, because it really forms the bedrock of his discipline. Moore actually studied journalism.
At the Federal University of Bahia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that background gave him this investigative mindset, the drive to find the truth, the real story. And he applies that directly to building his characters. His acting process is basically investigative reporting.
Okay, that connects the dots much more clearly. I mean, investigative reporting needs skepticism, checking sources, sticking to the facts. How does that actually work when you're prepping for, say, playing Escobar? It's not exactly fact-checking a news story.
Well, he treats the script almost like an assignment brief. Every role, for him, seems to demand thorough research, multiple sources, and meticulous fact-checking.
Wow.
He's not just reading lines off a page. He's digging into historical records. He's doing interviews, if possible, with people who knew the real figures.
Really? He talks to people connected to them?
Yeah, whenever feasible. He studies the political climate, the economic pressures that created the character's world.
Yeah.
It's like the ultimate expression of that first principle we can see research almost as a spiritual practice.
So he's not just learning lines, he's building an entire case file on the person.
Yeah.
What does that level of digging achieve when we actually see him on screen?
It results in performances that feel authentic, not just acted. You get this sense you're seeing the character's internal logic play out, their lived reality. The prep lets him show not just what the character does, but why. Their reasoning, their rationalizations, their fears. The actual thought process that leads them to make the choices they make, whether those choices are brilliant or, catastrophic.
And that commitment to the intellectual side, the truth-seeking, that must demand incredible control, right?
Right.
Especially with intense emotions. He's not really known for, chewing the scenery.
Exactly. That journalistic discipline translates into this really remarkable emotional control on screen. He gets that holding back, that restraint, often says much more than a big outburst.
Yeah.
A silence, a tiny shift in the eyes, a flicker of something that carries the weight.
How does that mental focus translate physically? Because these characters often carry immense burdens, power, trauma.
He brings the same rigor to the physical side. He really studies, how people physically hold trauma, how power shows up in postures. Is it confident, earned authority, or is it kind of guarded, defensive?
Interesting distinction.
Yeah, or how exhaustion shows up in tiny movements, microgestures. He wants the biolanguage to reflect all those invisible forces acting on the character, which brings us neatly to the why behind it all, the philosophy bit.
Right. We've talked about how the research, the core belief. This is where he really positions cinema as more than just, entertainment or escape. It's about ethical confrontation.
Yes. His whole philosophy as an actor seems built on radical empathy. But it's crucial to understand what that means in his context.
Okay.
It's not about liking the character. It's this intense, almost scholarly commitment to suspending your judgment, to exploring the complexity from their perspective, from the inside. He just refuses to settle for easy moral answers for himself or for us.
Okay, hang on. Radical empathy. That sounds potentially problematic when the character is someone like Pablo Escobar. How do you maintain distance? How does empathizing with a killer not become like making excuses for them?
That's the absolute tightrope walk, isn't it? And it ties into his second big principle, empathy without erasure. Moura doesn't ask you to sympathize, not in the sense of, oh, poor guy, especially not with characters deep in the moral gray, but he insists that you understand them. The goal is to dig out the reasons, the history, the fears, the justifications, however flawed, that make up that person's reality. You come away understanding how someone could reach that point.
Which is much harder than just slapping a monster label on them.
Much harder and much more unsettling, frankly.
And it seems his empathy goes beyond just the person. He looks at the systems around them, like each role is a kind of case study in systemic problems.
Totally. He dissects the systems. When he plays a character, he's also trying to portray the invisible forces boxing them in.
Like what kind of forces?
Big things. Poverty, deep-rooted corruption, the legacy of colonialism, institutions that are just broken. You make sure you see the character didn't just spring out of nowhere. They're a product of something bigger.
But that sounds so abstract, like something you'd read in a sociology paper. How does an actor actually show a colonial legacy? Just through performance, through body language and voice.
It's often in the subtext, I think. It's in the limitations, the feeling of desperation. A colonial legacy might show up as a character making choices, because the official paths, the institutional routes, are basically hollowed out or corrupt.
Ah, okay.
So in places like Brazil or Colombia, you see it in the corruption that makes legitimate ambition almost impossible, pushing people towards criminal avenues just to get ahead, or even just the sheer exhaustion of fighting a rigged system. That exhaustion becomes physical.
Right.
His performance becomes the kind of psychological proof of how that system grinds people down.
That really changes how you watch his work. Okay, let's make this concrete. Let's look at two specific roles that really show this philosophical depth. Starting with the big one, the one with the most obvious physical change. Pablo Escobar in Narcos.
Yeah, Narcos is like the perfect example of his whole investigative process in action. He didn't just put on weight. He immersed himself completely, lived it.
How?
He spent months deep in Colombian Spanish, not just learning the language, but mastering the specific Medellin accent, the paisa cadence. He knew that language carries history, culture, identity.
And the physical change, the weight gain, wasn't just cosmetic.
No way. It signaled status, right?
Yeah.
Comfort, power, the ability to just consume. But the real philosophical meat was portraying the man's contradictions.
The Robin Hood versus the brutal cartel boss.
Exactly. The guy who genuinely saw himself as a savior for the poor, who was reportedly tender with his family, and simultaneously a ruthless murderer responsible for unbelievable violence.
Holding both those truths at once in one character.
Yes, he shows you the horrific violence, but then maybe a moment later, the vulnerability or the intense paranoia needed to keep that power. It's deeply unsettling because it makes you grasp how those sides can exist in one person. It forces you, the viewer, to grapple with the complexity of evil, not just dismiss it.
Okay, now let's swing completely the other way. Sergio Vieira de Mello in the film Sergio. Much more internal, restrained, a diplomat's quiet heroism.
Right, a total shift. This role needed him to move from studying external factors to exploring internal moral weight. Moura dug into de Mello's speeches, his writings, accounts of his interactions.
To understand what?
To capture the accumulated psychological burden. Decades negotiating in the absolute darkest spots of human conflict, East Timor, Kosovo, Iraq.
So he wasn't embodying action, but embodying moral burden.
That's a great way to put it. He captured that specific kind of exhaustion often called moral fatigue. His performance is full of these tiny signals, micro-expressions, showing the toll of constantly witnessing horror while having to maintain the composure to try and broker peace. It's that quiet heroism of someone who, despite seeing diplomacy fail time and again, still clings to the belief in it. He makes you feel how fragile that belief becomes.
Which leads us to the final piece, really, this idea of artistic ethics. Looking at his career, it feels like a kind of deliberate manifesto against indifference, extending the questions beyond the character into social critique. This is the third principle, right? Art as intervention.
Precisely. He's always navigating that ethical tightrope. He knows he has to show the harsh stuff, the violence, the corruption, to be truthful. But he seems very careful never to sanitize it, nor to glorify it.
He's using the art to push conversations.
Exactly, to provoke necessary discussions.
And his work focused on Brazil really highlights that. thinking about Elite Squad Captain Nascimento.
Oh, yeah. Hugely controversial role because Nascimento embodies state violence, right? He operates outside the rules to get what he sees as justice. Moura's aim wasn't to make him a simple hero, obviously.
Yeah.
It was to use that character to expose the massive systemic failures in Brazil's police, the corruption. The performance had this gritty, almost documentary feel. It's an intervention saying, look at the source of this problem.
And then directing Mariella. That felt like doubling down on using film to tackle really sensitive, unresolved political history.
Absolutely. That film is about Carlos Mariella, a revolutionary during Brazil's military dictatorship who used violent tactics against the state. Moura spent years on the research context, interviews, politics, because he knew how loaded the subject was.
It's still debated fiercely in Brazil.
Fiercely. And he didn't offer an easy hero story. He used the film to ignite a critical debate about resistance, about state terrorism, about when, if ever, violence is justified. He forces you to wrestle with it, that violence often arises in response to other violence, but without giving it a stamp of approval.
So if we zoom out and look at the whole arc, the deep research, the challenging roles, the ethical stance, what are the core principles of this wisdom and art that defined his approach?
I think it boils down to those three pillars we've touched on. First, research is spiritual practice, that deep belief that you have to understand the facts, the reality, before you can even begin to perform. Second, empathy without erasure, being able to truly inhabit a character, see the world through their eyes, but without excusing their actions, demanding that intellectual, sometimes uncomfortable engagement from the audience.
Okay.
And finally, art as intervention, using every single role, every project as a chance to challenge assumptions about justice, about morality, about where power really lies.
What's really striking is how he manages to do all this deep, often critical work within mainstream entertainment. He proves that you can have both, right? Enlightenment and entertainment.
Yeah, he delivers performances that connect globally, they're accessible, but he doesn't seem to water down the complexity, the social or philosophical questions. He keeps his artistic integrity intact while reaching a huge audience.
It's quite a balancing act.
It really is. His career feels like a kind of roadmap for artists who don't want to separate their craft from their conscience. He shows that acting can be incredibly meaningful when it's used to ask the big questions about power, about justice.
A fascinating look at an actor using his platform in such a profound way. So, to leave you with something to think about after this deep dive. If Wagner Moura uses the camera like both a mirror, reflecting society, and a microscope, digging into its hidden workings, what's your role as the viewer in finishing that philosophical exploration? Especially when you're faced with those complex characters, those moral ambiguities he presents.
Yeah, maybe think about the system behind the character next time you see someone difficult on screen. Thanks for diving deep with us today.